Jobs, housing, and income disparities were just some of the issues Dr. Martin Luther King was trying to fix during his 1968 Poor People's Campaign. He spent the last few years of his life fighting for basic rights for the forgotten in America. 54 years later, the fight continues, this time with Reverend William Barber and Reverend Dr. Alvin O'Neill Jackson.
Barber and Jackson, along with thousands of other activists, are in the middle of a multi-state mobilization tour. They're trying to bring attention to the issues that are affecting millions of Americans. Now, it culminates in a mass Poor People's Low-Wage Workers Assembly and March in Washington, D.C. on June 18th. Now, here to talk about the campaign is Reverend Dr. Alvin O'Neill Jackson, the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Oh, we are so happy to have you here on the show today. Now, first things first, the campaign has already hit some U.S. cities. What have you learned on the campaign and also what is the final goal?
Well, the final goal, we're on our way to Washington, D.C., June 18th, and where we expect hundreds, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people to fill the streets of Washington, D.C., to call attention to the five big interlocking injustices of systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, the war-based economy, and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism. So it will be a big day, June 18. We'll conclude that tour in Washington, D.C. on the 18th of June.
On the 18th of June. Mimi here, thank you for joining us. You know, Democratic politicians, they often talk about the middle class when talking about helping regular Americans, and we rarely hear them, though, talk about the poor. Why is that?
Well, the poor, it seems to be a bad word, but 140 million poor and low-wealth people in this country, almost half the country. 43.5% of this country's population is poor, living beneath the poverty level. And, you know, sometimes people working 2 and 3 jobs, but still not able to make ends meet. And so this is a march to Washington to call attention to that. And we're saying a march on Washington and to the polls, because we're going to be voting in record numbers in the midterm election. So it's about June 18th, but it's also about the midterm elections as well.
So we were talking about the march, and you also just said that so many people are living below the poverty line. So what are the goals of the Poor People's Campaign with those numbers?
The goal is to number one, call attention to that fact. I mean, I think many people really don't know that there are that many people living beneath below the poverty level, and to build from the bottom up. We have presented a moral budget that we presented it. Several of our congresspersons joined us presenting a budget in the House of Representatives, showing how if we prioritize some of our priorities, there's enough for everybody. Scarcity is a lie in this country. There is abundance, but we spend 53% of every dollar on the military, and to prioritize some of that for health care and for paid family leave and the other things people need to live. One of the things that we've found that the pandemic didn't discriminate, but the government and society has discriminated, because poor communities were impacted 5 times more than wealthier counties. So we've got some serious inequities here, and that is what June 18th is about, calling attention to those inequities and showing how we can build from the bottom up.
That's right, build from the bottom up. You know, your message is so in line with, you know, a social justice ministry. And oftentimes in Black churches, we hear, you know, we talk a lot about prosperity and prosperity gospel. But why do you think more churches aren't talking civil rights like they were in the 50s and the 60s?
Well, we've got to keep just kind of reminding folks that we've got work to do. We've kind of put a myth there that a lot of folks were doing civil rights in the 50s and 60s. The numbers were actually rather small then. Dr. King was probably the most unpopular when he was assassinated in Memphis in 1968. So it's always been work to call this to the attention of the larger society. And so we've just got to keep working at it. But we organized in 40 states around the country, and so we're finding that there are many people who are getting the message and joining us as we call attention to these inequities and injustices.
I like that you are honest about Dr. King being the most unpopular, but you've still been following closely in the steps of Reverend King, and you fought for voting rights in North Carolina. You are also talking about those of us that need help the most. What encourages you to do this kind of work?
Well, the people, the poor and low-wage working people who are out there fighting every day, working several jobs, trying to make ends meet. That is what encourages me and what encourages all of us to keep working at this. And it's across racial lines. It's black, it's white, it's Asian, it's immigrant. All kinds of people from all over the country joining together. That's what keeps us all in this work together, young, old, so all kinds of folks joining. And it's always been a moral fusion movement like that that really makes the difference. And so we're going to be calling attention to that on June 18th. And we're saying that June 18th is not just about the day, but it's about a declaration of an ongoing moral committed movement that builds power, changes the political narrative, and fully addresses poverty and low wealth from the bottom up. That's what this work is about.
We will be following the Poor People's Campaign very closely to see what you guys' next moves are. Thank you so much for joining us, Reverend Dr. Alvin O'Neill Jackson, and we definitely hope to have you back soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having me.